And welcome back to Retrospect My Fantasy. Today we are going to be continuing on our journey of game development, where we are working on the second edition campaign setting of Al-Qadim and trying to translate that into the modern day 5th edition. We're trying to give it a little bit more polish, make it a little bit shinier and good to go. So, without further ado, no, actually, hold on, there is further ado. First thing is that we are partners with Humble. So, if you head on over to the Humble homepage right there, you can take a look at all the myriad options you have to helping support them and the charities that they work with. You can either do a Humble bundle, where you get to pick how your money gets divided amongst the developer, the Humble people, the charity, and if you're using our link, myself, you can use the Humble store, which frequently has amazing sales. In fact, just this morning I bought both Legends of Grimrock and the new Doom for stream. So look forward to those in the future. And then the last option you have to help supporting amazing charities and our channel through that link is by the Humble Monthly. Humble Monthly is a subscription-based service, and for the subscription is $12 a month, and you get about $150-ish worth of games. I don't know, like, the exact average of what they've delivered, but it's about $150 worth of games. They're all amazing ways to help support charities, as well as... Sorry, I'm messing with my mic a little bit here. Amazing ways to help charities. There's always a featured charity whenever you click on a sale or an item, and 5% of your purchase goes towards that featured charity. If you use our link, an additional 5% of the money that you spent on that item goes towards me, and an additional 5% goes towards the charity of my choosing, which is Doctors Without Borders. So please, if you're looking at picking anything up in the near future, whether it's a Humble bundle, like the cosplay bundle that they just put out, which is a whole bunch of books on how to help you get into the hobby of cosplay, or if you want to pick something up from the store or sign up for Humble Monthly, all those are amazing ways to help support this channel, help support amazing charities, and get yourself what you're looking for. And the second thing that I need to talk about before we get into the game design, is that we have a Discord. So, if you click on that link right there, that'll hook you up to our Discord channel. We've got a whole bunch of in-game comms we've got one for Guns of Icarus and Heroes of the Storm, Overwatch, Minecraft, PUBG. I've got 2 for Killing Floor 2, or just in general Killing Floor, 2 for Payday 2, and 2 for Warframe. And the reason I have those set up is because I should probably put at least another one for PUBG, but it's because those games... Oh, and Guns of Icarus. It's because those games have limited squad size. So if multiple people in our community want to play the same game, but not necessarily all be on the same team, they can communicate to their team members without giving everything away to someone else who's playing with them. Now, let us get into our game design. So, we left off with, we were taking a whole bunch of the data from the Al-Qadim, or from the 2nd edition AD&D Arabian Adventures Guide, which is the very first book that's kind of set up everything for Al-Qadim, or as the world is called, Zakhara. And we were taking all the stuff from that and putting it into a Word document so we can edit it. And we're not going to take everything. We're not going to copy literally the whole book. But what I am doing is I'm copying, right now, the sections revolving around kind of the general information that a player might want to have, and a DM probably wants to have, about the world. And I could do the write-up. I could type it all out and just like have the book in my lap while doing that, or get one of those little book stands and sit right there. But I figured that's not a smart way of doing it. The smart way of doing this is to take the work that was already done but is still relevant in even if you're running a game that does not use any of the published like adventure modules or anything like that. All this basic information about like how families work, how codes of ethics and laws work in Al-Qadim, all that stuff is still going to be relevant regardless. So that's the information that we're actually copying over, is the stuff that doesn't need an update really. But what I'm going to do once we have everything is I'm going to essentially edit it twice. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do, I don't want to call it like the DM edit, but that's probably as close as anything else. Essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to do, this is something I came up with today, is players don't necessarily want the full background information, but they definitely, it makes it easier for them to interface with the game world if they have a certain basic understanding of some of these things. So what we're going to do once we get all this stuff put in here is we're going to edit it for, we're going to edit a DM version, which is going to be pretty much straight as it is. We're going to change a few things, like if anything makes reference to like to second edition D&D rules or anything like that, we're gonna take that out. But for the most part, it's just going to be straight up. But when I get to doing the player's version of all this stuff, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to cut a lot of stuff out, because there's just a lot of stuff that the players don't necessarily need, but if they want, I mean, they'll have the most basic rudimentary grasp of all this stuff, and if they want more, well, we'll have a version that has a more in-depth section. Because in my experience, at least, as both a player and a DM, players don't always want everything. Not up front. A lot of times, they want the DM to take something that they may or may not be familiar with and give it to them in a new lens. Also, if you guys have any questions about what's going on or about the campaign setting or anything like that, please feel free. I have I've run 2 games. I've read most of the material. I've specifically tried to stay away from any of the published adventures, reading those, mainly because I don't necessarily want them to influence my own campaigns. That's not to say that there's anything wrong with published adventures. I just don't want them to have an accidental influence on my writing. However, as we're going through some of these sections, we very well may dip into some of the pre-published campaign modules and see what kind of things we can scour from them. Or scour. Pilfer. Pilfer's a much better word for what we're doing. I do own them all these books. I know for a fact that you can't see it very well, but this right here is the first book on this shelf that is Al-Qadim. This is the last book on this shelf that is Al-Qadim. That's all of it. I own it all. It was actually, for the most part, except for a couple of the box sets, pretty easy to get a hold of. I mostly just spent a lot of time on Amazon looking for it. A couple of the things that I got were still in their original shrink wrap too, which was awesome. But I immediately took those off because I wanted to use the stuff that was in there. Both my campaigns that I ran in Al-Qadim were through the lens of Pathfinder system, which is it's 3.5. It's a cleaned up, better version of 3.5 in my opinion, but it's 3.5. There's no hiding that. Hell, I want to say they advertised it as such for a long time. But in terms of like how the world of Al-Qadim kind of interacts with, it did not interact as well. That's not true. It interacted fine with Pathfinder, but Pathfinder characters are very powerful. So I had to like ramp up the things that they were doing. Pathfinder characters are way more powerful than pretty much any other game systems characters at any particular point. Hey, Day Zero. Which meant that immediately I had my characters fighting. Actually, no, not immediately, but God, what was the first fight that I gave them? I want to say we had a Stridge swarm, which is, if you don't know what Stridges are, they're essentially giant mosquitoes that pass along diseases. I've had them fight a lot of other humans, actually. Or rather, sapient races. A lot of ghouls. You'll have to tell me how it is. I've heard mixed things about State of Decay 2. I've had them do some negotiations, which was very interesting because most of them couldn't negotiate for squat. They were all like pretty much bruisers in my first game. In my second campaign, there was a lot more negotiating and political intrigue and things like that. They also had to do a rescue a major city from a plight. I had them fight rocks, which are essentially giant hawks or eagles. In both games, I've had them interact with the gods pretty regularly. Well, not regularly, but way more than most people might. but that's because they're adventurers, and adventurers do exceptional things. Oh, so that's actually that segue, even though we're not in the religion section yet. That segues very nicely into a weird kind of discussion topic in Al-Qadim. And that is that, so in most D&D campaign settings, the gods are the gods. They created the world. They are responsible for mostly responsible for the creation of all the various races. They are partially responsible for not only divine magic, but also arcane magic. So instead of just like clerics and paladins, but also wizards and sorcerers and whatnot. But in Al-Qadim, they are not. I liken the Al-Qadim gods to more like what am I thinking of? Like the Greek gods, in terms of like how they interact with the world and whatnot. Except I say that, but the Greek gods are in D&D, and they also have the same sort of influence on the realm that they watch over. Partly, so here's the thing with Al-Qadim. Al-Qadim takes place in the Forgotten Realms. It takes place on a faraway continent from the rest of Faerun, but it takes place in the same planet as the Forgotten Realms. And the Forgotten Realms gods created that world. No big deal. Except there's other gods. In fact, there's 3 whole other pantheons of gods. And yet those gods, those 3 other pantheons of gods, had nothing to do with the creation of the world. And Al-Qadim, the gods, although they are all-powerful divine beings, they're not really all-powerful. They're not powerful enough to create worlds. But they're powerful enough to influence the world. They're powerful enough to rip it asunder. Okay, we're just going to take that song and we're going to remove that one. Because that is annoying even for me. And I have a pretty odd tolerance of music. So, the gods also, unlike most other gods, at least the gods in Al-Qadim, they walk around, they have physical, seemingly mortal bodies. But they also have the power to, like, invade dreams and turn as bright as any light and disintegrate people, like in the Greek myths. And it's really kind of weird when you're thinking about the greater cosmology of D&D, where normally the gods don't have an alignment. Every god, everything in D&D has an alignment. Not the gods of Zakara. Not really. They have things that they kind of oversee, but they don't really have an alignment the way we might normally consider it. Not to say that they're necessarily, like, true neutral, but they don't facilitate a particular alignment. They facilitate a behavior. They typically watch over, like, honorable people, which you would say would be lawful or good, or lawful good, except honor in Zakara is very different. thieves are not considered honorable, except by other thieves. Then it's okay. Honor amongst thieves, that's where that comes from. And yes, there is honor amongst thieves in this world. And assassins. And it's very different. And for a lot of people, that's a bit more difficult to wrap their head around. But it makes for far more interesting gods. The gods can change their appearance. They can... anything that is... what would be considered holy magic they can do. They can bless weapons. They can send people on holy quests. In fact, that's pretty common. One god turned one of my player character, not my player characters, but one of my one of the characters at my table into a revenant, which is an undead, because the guy gave up his soul so that they didn't have to kill someone who was good. So the god gave up, told him that what was it? It was, all right, I'll take your soul from your body and put it into this magical gem for you. And your body will stay alive until your journey is over, at which point you're mine. And the character agreed, so the god made it happen. And that character was... he had all the negatives of being undead, or rather, specifically of being a revenant. So he was more susceptible to light and fire damage, to radiant damage hurt him more. But that was something that the... okay, so this is, I believe, the end. We might get to start doing some editing now. Let's see here. Is there any other sections? So we just did Fate and Lore Giver. Also, okay, so, important note, I can't believe I didn't mention this earlier. All this music, god dang it, all this music is available at Free Music Archive. That's why I have Winamp up and running, so that you can see the artist and the name of the track if you wish. Let's see here, any other lore. Stations in life could be interesting. Oh man, also this artwork is just amazing. Is there just a section of this stations in life that would help in lore? All characters in the Land of Fate have their own station in life, a place that is in the great fabric of time, which is unrolled day by day, from the meanest beggar to the most gaudy Khan. They have their roles to play and their positions in relation to one another. This relative position is called station. It is a measure of social stature and determines how others perceive a character in the Land of Fate. Station is hereditary. To most other natives of the land, a character's station is readily apparent unless The individual seeks to disguise it or enhance it somehow. As a rule, race and gender do not affect station. That's probably the most important thing in that whole section. In gameplay, station rating from 20 to 0, with the most despicable outcasts, with 0 being the most despicable outcasts, and 20 representing the most esteemed and worthy of caliphs. Most individuals remain close to their initial station. A man born to a banker family tends to become a banker. A woman born to a caliph's harem remains within those circles for most of her life. However, adventurers and those who walk with fate will see their station rise and fall over time, according to their actions and abilities. So your initial station for PC is determined by their kit. Gotcha, okay. Do we want to include station? We probably should. Station determines the kind of social pecking order. Its greatest... maybe not. Maybe that's a bit... Maybe we'll include this as in a optional rules section, because there is a lot here, and making use of it appropriately can be difficult in a game. I never used it in the game. I would just tell people, like, hey, this person is rich as hell, and it is very clear, and then my players were smart enough to ask to act in proper deference or reverence for that individual's position in the world. Alright, so if we're not going to do stations, we've already looked over kits, proficiencies, that's old school skills in 2nd edition D&D. Perils of adventure, the armory, survival, calling upon fate. Desert survival, maybe? So let's see here. Desert in the land of fate is a vast sea of dunes to rocky outcrops or steppes that briefly turn green with a spring rain. Which, if you've never actually seen steppes turn green from a spring rain or just after monsoon season, it looks amazing for the week that it exists, and then it kind of becomes burned out shrubs afterwards. All these regions have one thing in common, one quality that makes the desert: they lack water. Even the steppes that turn green on occasion is parched and dry for as a whole, only teasing its inhabitants with intense but brief seasonal downpours. Traveling through the desert terrain are definitely concerns within water, well-provisioned parties. So, this whole section where it says, water's a problem, I have never, ever had to make my characters check for water, which was something that I really wanted to do. The problem is that wizards, clerics, and rangers, I believe, at least in Pathfinder, all have the make water spell available to them. That's it. If you can make infinite amounts of water from literally nothing, or not infinite, but it's a lot. It's gallons of water. I want to say it's 4 gallons of water a day per use of the spell. They don't need to worry about water. So we probably won't include anything about dehydration. Oh god, this artwork is so wonderful. Wind and sand. Dehydration is not the only enemy for those that journey through the desert. High winds can lift sand and dust into joking, blinding storm. Characters trapped in such a storm without protection suffer 1d2. That's not nearly... in addition to inflicting the damage noted above, Desert storms can bury characters alive. This is the second edition I'm used to reading about. So for those not in the know, second edition D&D is generally considered deadly as all hell. And that is because... Sorry, I'm still messing with the mic, trying to get a good position. And that is because the way second edition D&D worked is, if you are not prepared for your adventure, you will die. There's a monster in the second edition monster manual called a rock grub. It looks like kind of like a fatty worm. It's kind of white and a little bit larger than normal. If it bites you, it will crawl into your skin and kill you if you are not quick. It only does like a D2 in damage, but it leaves behind. But if it's able to actually burrow into your skin, it kills you in like 5 days. No big deal, right? No, not that like adventurers kind of frequently sleep outside in the wilderness and are exposed to all sorts of weird dangers. No, not a big deal at all. But this worm, I mean, that griffin that we just killed, not a worry. But this tiny worm, dead. Let's see here. Characters who are buried alive by a desert storm can dig themselves out in D3 rounds. Those buried by an avalanche of sand, whether natural or caused by a spell, can dig free in 1d6 rounds. Unless otherwise noted in the spell's description. Okay, so you can dig yourself out, otherwise you die. Constitution is lost while a character is buried alive. Or Constitution lost. Oh shit. That's another thing that was in second edition D&D a lot, is they would just take stat points away. Just, oh yeah, you lost a finger in that fight. Gonna take 2 points off your dexterity. Sorry, man. Maybe you should have wore a bracer or not a bracer. Maybe you should have worn a gauntlet. Then you wouldn't have lost that finger. Second edition was a murder DM's playground. If you wished it. There's nothing saying that you had to follow all the rules of every creature. Alright, so this is another thing right here. Fate that is kind of an important thing. Oh, and then the evil eye, but I'm not a big fan of the evil eye ruling. Instead, there's another optional rule that I really do like, but I'm not 100% sure how to implement it in 5th edition D&D, so we'll peruse that one when we get there. But here, in Zakharah, fate is a force which guides and shapes the lives of everyone in all of Zakharah, or of all of Zakharans. And all Zakharans know her power. Is she a god? The god of gods? Powerful ruler of the genies? Or simply a pervasive force beyond true comprehension? The answer for all of the the answers for all the Shairs and priests to debate. For others, it matters not who fate is, but what she does. She is the weaver of time, supplying threads of the future and mixing them with threads of the past. She graciously provides the basis for all victories, and she is the justification for all defeats. She does not excuse characters who do not do their best. However, their future is in their own hands as well as in the hands of fate. Win or lose, she is always there, the supreme mediator and the guardian of the future. Dehydration, blinding storms, sandslides, bury characters alive. These are all but a few of the perils faced by characters in Fate's burning lands. She is not without mercy, however. Characters who find themselves in dire and deadly straits can call upon Fate for aid. She may smile upon those who call her, but she may also turn her hand against them. most Sakarans try to avoid placing themselves in need of such divine intervention. I had a character in my last campaign who was specifically, he was an oracle, and so he was the type of person, that can kind of see the future, and so he knew that his grasp of the future was tentative. But he hated that fate had put this upon him. So whenever possible, he tried to defy whatever fate he saw in the future, in the stars. But I specifically had several times where fate would intervene, and he would be the only person that could see her. Oh, he was also blind, so he couldn't see normally, but fate would show up and do something, and he would see it. That was part of his curse. She would talk to him. In fact, there was a time when I had her appear to all the characters, and everyone was extremely confused because I had her show up as a little girl, no older than 4 or 5 years old. No, I think she was like 12 or 13 years old. And everyone else was like, "What? Who is this little girl? And why is she talking like she knows us? And why is..." Oh god, I can't remember his name now. The character's name. I know the player. And why is David talking to her this way? Does he know her? Are they related? Essentially, the way the calling upon fate mechanic works is, if you choose to employ it, a character may try to call upon fate to help them. If they call upon fate to help them with something, you, as the DM, adjudicate the whole situation. You roll the die to determine if fate has a response or not, if you just know that fate would not respond to this situation. And you keep track of how often they ask for fate's interference. The more often they are to rely on fate to help them, the less likely she's gonna show up. Even if she doesn't actually show up any of the other times, the more that they ask for her assistance, the less likely she is to actually show up. Even if the one time that she might have shown up, is really important. Maybe even to the existence of the whole world. But hey, all those times that you wanted her help, those were inappropriate times to ask for it. And because of that, she's not going to smile upon you. In fact, she's probably going to be pretty wrathful and make it far worse. If you are familiar with other D&D campaign settings, you can think of fate as kind of a lesser version of the Bladed Lady of Sigil. The Lady of Pain. Except fate is kind of godly. Whereas the Lady of Pain, if you try to worship her as a god, honestly, as long as you're not getting a whole bunch of people worshiping her as a god, she probably won't care. But if you do start to get a whole bunch of people worshiping the Lady of Pain as a god, she will show up and turn you all into giblets. Because that is how the Lady of Pain likes things. She does not like people worshiping her because she believes that the gods are selfish, or so I suspect. We never really learn much about the Lady of Pain on purpose. She's also one of the few things in D&D that is literally unkillable. You can kill the gods. Most of them have stats. You can't. I mean, even the Lady of Pain has stats, but the Lady of Pain has stats insofar as like, hey, do you want to see how long it takes for the Lady of Pain to kill one of your PCs? Well, I can give you a hint. The number begins and ends with 1 round. That's if she actually decides to use her power on you, to kill you. The Lady of Pain has other ways of dealing with problems. Alright, so the Evil Eye, I'm not going to put in there. The Bazaar is awesome. Shairs are also awesome, but we're not working about them. Wizard spells. Okay. Alright, so I think for now we are done with the Arabian Adventures book, which means... Nope, wrong one. We are going to go to our box set of Land of Fate. Oh, so this table right here, what that shows you is, as you're going through the book, sometimes they're going to give you abbreviations for things, because if they had to type in dwarf a million times throughout this book, well, if they just have a bit of shorthand for dwarf, that'll make not only their lives a lot easier, but it'll save space so they can put more stuff in. So this is all like map stuff that they don't then do anything with the map, at least not immediately. Okay, so now we're getting into what things are like on a more routine basis for the different types of people. And it looks like it's starting with the Al-Hadhar, or the people who live in cities. I'm personally not the big fan of the Al-Hadhar, not because there's necessarily anything wrong with them, but because I believe that I don't like city adventures. I don't like running city adventures because I don't really know how to do it well. Yeah, so this is definitely all pretty much going into the DM section. Non-human races, war. Watch as our document expands to like tenfold. Holy crap. I was slightly joking. Ooh, boy. There's only one game that I ever ran that kind of worked as a city adventure. kind of. And it wasn't really so much a city adventure so much as they were all characters in cities. And that was in the campaign. So way back in the day, before Dungeons and Dragons was owned by Wizards of the Coast, it was owned by a company called TSR. But it was not the only game that TSR made. TSR also made a game called Alternity, or really what that game says is alternate reality, which is a great like sci-fi game, by the way. But all the characters were... So I essentially ran a criminal game. Every character was a criminal. They were all part of specifically an organized crime syndicate. And their boss, for lack of a better term, was a crooked lawyer for this syndicate. So they would go and take care of problems. In this future Earth, we've made contact with aliens. Things are tentative with most of the alien races we've made contact with. Some of them are cool, some of them not so much. But I had, a bunch of characters that were all pretty much all different races. I don't think actually a single one of them was human, now that I think about it. But Earth has also become mostly a megatopolis? Where the entire world is a city. That's pretty much what happened to Earth. And so whenever the game started in Manhattan, I had them do things over in Paris. I had them do a couple... What did I have them do? Oh, in Paris, I had them... They essentially had to kidnap somebody, and somebody famous, and let them know that they weren't above getting... above being gotten to. I also had them break someone out of prison, and then later I had them get caught and they all went to prison, which was... This was actually the Alternity campaign. What was it? That was the first or second campaign I ever ran. And I think it was the first long campaign I ever ran. So when they went to prison, that was what I did my kind of like... So I typically do this thing where I have all the characters figure out something that they would do in the meantime. So they went to prison for 5 years. And so over the course of the 5 years, I had them each tell me what they were going to do for that year in prison. Like, what are they going to focus on? One of them just got jacked. All he did was like, that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to get swole. I'm going to work out every day. I'm going to be the biggest person in the prison yard. And by the end of the 5 years, when he was released, he was. I think I want to say I actually gave them like 25 years. Oh no, I gave them 5 years because the best charges that could be brought up on them were conspiracy to commit something. They happened to come back from an area that was an area in space that had become near another planet that was currently a gang war zone. And they got caught as they were coming back. But the best charges they could get were conspiracy. Oh, and their ship and all their stuff got blown up. Which was just my... So I gave them a ship, I gave them a bunch of guns and whatnot to go and do whatever they had to do. But I also wanted them to earn their place in this crime syndicate. So I had to take everything away from them to see what they would do. So here, one of the guys, he started up a gang in prison for his race. There was only like 4 other guys of his race in this prison yard, but he started a gang of them for the purposes of, like, they were essentially like hit squad A#1 in the prison. If somebody needed somebody taken out, they went to these guys. Let's hear here. What? Trying to think what the other ones did. Well, one of them was an AI, so he actually didn't go to prison. What he did was he wanted a body so that he could run around and do things on his own. So he snuck a Trojan into some of the government's accounting software, and hid it as small transactions for the maintenance and janitorial staff. So anytime the maintenance and janitorial staff would buy stuff, would get their budget. Their budget was smaller than it might otherwise have been, and he was getting the kickbacks from that. God, what did the last character do? I believe what she tried to do was serve her time without, like, pissing anybody off. Which was a difficult task for her. That was a very difficult task for her, but I believe that was what she wanted to do. She wanted to serve her time without starting any trouble. And then when they got out, I essentially had my lawyer character walk up to them and be like, alright guys, so now that you're out of prison, and you've proven yourself loyal enough, I mean, you went to war for us and you served time without ratting on us. Now it's up to you guys to figure out what you're gonna do for us. Money flows uphill in crime syndicates. If you want the protections that we can offer, if you want the name, if you want all the benefits that come with being in a crime syndicate, well, you got to do something to pay up. To pay up. So what they did was they took a bunch of jobs, like raiding weapons shipments, I want to say they did a couple of hits. They freed some slaves from one planet. And once they started making some money, that's when my character, the lawyer character that I had that was kind of their boss, was an old character of mine in this same setting. So I had him go up to them like, alright guys, you've been doing a good job. So, I'm gonna offer you a bit more freedom. But with this freedom comes a bit more responsibility. You've been making good money, but we want something more tangible. And so they put their minds together, and what they decided to do was they were going to build out in the middle of freaking nowhere in an asteroid belt, essentially Mos Eisley. That was pretty much their plan. So they scouted out a few asteroid belts out in the middle of nowhere, found some good sized asteroids, and started doing like surveying. All the while they're still doing all sorts of illicit jobs just to keep the money flowing and keeping people happy. Oop. And then I think they saved up like 1 million credits or something like that, and we're like, okay, now that we have all this money, now we can actually start building it. And so essentially what I did was like, okay, you guys tell me what you want in this place, and I will tell you how long and how much money. Also, how on the DL are you doing the construction? Because that's also going to raise time and money. And I want to say, in the end, what they created was a hotel, casino, shipyard for criminals. With those, any criminal could come there, but those who were in the same crime syndicate as them had a bit more leeway on their debts and whatnot. Also, they bought a nuke mine. I think they bought like 2 nuke mines as part of their like. This was like their protection plan. Was, all right, so if the United Earth military / police force comes knocking, well, we have a great weapon. They're not taking this place easily, and they might rethink what they're going to do when a stealthed nuke mine attaches to one of their ships and detonates. And of course I had this happen, but I had them get word ahead of time. Like, someone got word out to them that like the United Earth fleet, or a section of the United Earth fleet, was on its way to take them out because they had something stashed there that the United Earth military really wanted back. And so what they did was they essentially made an announcement over their PA system, like, all right, guys, to everyone, including all the other criminals, like, hey, listen, the United Earth wants to come and stop us from being who we are. You know, they gave the kind of this rousing speech, and I was like making checks to see how other people, to how all the other criminals reacted, and essentially what it came down to is, I want to say it was like 50%, 60% of the other criminals who were in this place using it for its intended purposes of lying low, letting heat drop, spending money, fencing goods, keeping goods safe. A significant number of them decided, you know what? No. This is worth protecting. This is something that we can get behind. And so half of the other criminals got in their ships and left, and the other half stayed behind and helped fight. And thanks due in large part to 2 nuke mines, they were able to repel the United Earth fleet that was sent there. But Alternity is a great system. It's a bit older, it's a bit harder to come by than the Al-Qadim stuff, even though it's newer than the Al-Qadim stuff. Just because it was such a small print run, but it has a lot of that, like, in between second and third edition. Like, it's very clear, like, this was in a weird place when it was made, but it's great. It's way better than most. It's a better Star Wars setting than most Star Wars settings in terms of actual rules and whatnot. It's better than most other cyberpunk games out there. It has better hacking rules than pretty much any other game that involves hacking that I've seen. And most interestingly enough, for those of you who are a bit more math inclined, especially in the astrophysics and rocket sciences area, there's an entire ship's guide that details how spaceship combat should work. And essentially what it comes down to is, or including dogfighting and astrogation and all this other stuff, but essentially how dogfighting works is, as these two ships are flying by each other and dogfighting and whatnot, they are spitting out, if they're using solid projectile weapons like bullets, they're spitting out hundreds of thousands of rounds while they're still miles apart from each other, hundreds of miles apart from each other. Hoping, the hope is, if I spray a big enough cloud of bullets or lasers or rockets, my opponent will not be able to dodge it, because we're traveling way too damn fast. In fact, usually what happens is, especially if it's like rockets, the rockets will, because they're launched and then ignite, the ship will pass the rocket. So hopefully the rocket will follow in behind them and hit the ship that they're passing by. But if the math portion of D&D is too easy for you, and you want something a bit more highbrow in that sense, try to find Alternity. Try. It's a great system, and if you can find the books for it, it's freaking chicka crazy. It also is just really unique. It essentially has 4 grades for any sort of skill test or anything like that. Amazing, good, normal, and failure. And those are just thresholds you have to beat. That's all it is. It's a threshold system. Now, the threshold is determined by your skills and your skill points and your stats. But it's just a threshold system. Do you have an amazing victory? Well, if you have an amazing victory on punching a guy, well, you punched the crap out of him. Did you get an okay victory on punching the guy? Well, I mean, then you hit him, but it's nothing special. You didn't, like, knock him out or, like, break his jaw or anything like that. And armor actually works like armor. And weapons. So, a big problem for most modern and futuristic games is that weapons don't work in those, as weapons don't really work the way weapons work. Like, if you've ever fired a rifle, or a pistol for that matter, any gun, you know how guns work. And if you take a look at most other role-playing systems that include guns, it'll say, like, this is a 9mm, or this is a 9mm pistol. This is a Glock. Okay? This is a Glock. A Glock does X damage. Neat. A Glock does X damage. Well, this is a 45. A 45 a 1911. We'll do Y damage. And Y is significantly different from X, even though if you look at the effects on like a human body and armor of a 45 ACP versus a 9mm parabolic round, they're very similar. Very, very similar. Now, I'm not going to say that the 45 ACP is not a more powerful round. What I'm just saying is they're not so dissimilar to require different math to figure out. Here's what you do. You take whatever X is for the 9mm and make it +1 or +2. There's your 45. But that's not how that works in most games. Or they just lump everything into one field. It's like, this is a handgun. All handguns are the same. This is a rifle. All rifles are the same. This is a sniper rifle. All sniper rifles are the same. Which is not true. Not in the least. I mean, if you want to get into the philosophical realm that all guns are the same because they're designed to do one thing, and that is kill people, yes, that is 100% true. But if you want to get into the nitty-gritty for the purposes of, say, determining hit points and how much damage a gun would do to a person, well, then things get a little bit weirder. But I digress. Alternity, great system. Although, I say that and I immediately think of some of its flaws. It definitely has some pretty big flaws, such as, have you ever thought about using negative numbers for a positive effect in an RPG? They did. A weapon that has a -1 bonus. That's pretty common thing to see in Alternity for weapons or skills that, or the bonuses that they tell you. They're not wrong in the fact that it is a bonus, but the math is done in such a way that it initially doesn't make a goddamn lick of sense. I definitely need to raise this a little bit. It's getting just a bit too much of my keyboard. Of course, it doesn't help that I also hit my keys kind of hard, but so I'm trying to think of some other good role-playing tales to tell. So first off, I've tried to get housemate Ryan to join this twice. I'm also going to try and get some of my other friends to join in. Maybe, interview me, or I'll interview them about their role-playing experiences. But let's see here. So let's start with let's start this a little bit. What's my history with role-playing games? With pen and paper role-playing games? Well, a long time ago, on a street that's not that far away, but kind of far away from where I'm currently sitting. A friend of mine, when I was very young, I'm like 6, 7, no, younger than that, like 4 or 5, had a cousin visiting. And his cousin, my friend was a couple years older than me, and his cousin was kind of running him through a super basic adventure in D&D. And I asked if I could play, and the guy said sure. Now, I didn't really understand what was going on. I was mostly just told what was happening and what I was doing. I was too young to really understand the agency that I had, or really what was happening. The biggest thing that I remember about that game was I had a cloak that would allow me to walk through shadows, and I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. And then I didn't play an RPG until I was 22. A decade ago. I was playing miniatures war games down at one of our local shops, and I was playing War Machine, and one of the other War Machine players was like, hey, we've got an open spot in our Iron Kingdoms game. Iron Kingdoms is a campaign setting made for Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 edition that is the role-playing version of War Machine. And I was like, okay, that sounds awesome. So he invited me there, and I joined the table, and he helped me make my very first character, which he gave me... God. He gave me so much stuff. I was so loaded down with stuff that my character technically would not be able to move. And the way he rolled stats was ridiculous. It was 5d6, reroll 1s, take the top 3, take the highest 3. So the characters were just ridiculously powerful. And because he liked to have really random rolling be a big part of character creation, we rolled on not even tables. We just this is something I still have a problem with today, is I can't name characters for squat. I just can't think of names. I have a hard time with that. So we're rolling on this random, essentially it's not even a table. It's essentially just a small list of example last names. So he just has me roll on it. Just roll it out and we'll count out, and that's what your last name will be. So I roll, and I get the same last name as a royal in one of the countries. So then he makes me distant relative of that royal, cousin's nephew, or not cousin's nephew, cousin's son's son, sort of thing. So technically I'm in the royal line, but not really. So then that gave my character a whole bunch of extra baggage, and it was a mess. Later, Ryan, who you guys have met before, housemate Ryan, invited me, who was in that game, and whose house, this house, that game took place in, he invited me to his game, which was a lot more low to the ground. At that point, I had had a couple experiences like making characters, because once I got into it, I was like, okay. So then I just like practiced making characters. Not that it requires practice, but it was just like, it was a fun thing to do, making characters. So, sorry, need some water. So I sat down at Ryan's table and rolled out a character. I had an idea of what I wanted to do. I wanted to do a fighter, which is normally like big weapons, swords, shields, that sort of thing. Except I wanted to do a dexterity-based fighter. I wanted to have a fighter that used knives. But that's not the way it rolled out. So then I made a pretty standard fighter who was eventually going to take levels in Cleric. We made a backstory for the guy, threw him into the campaign, and had a blast until that character died. That character died doing something heroic, though. I smashed the head of this big undead thing while I was bleeding out, and because I was still acting as opposed to like not doing anything and just like holding my insides in my body, I bled to death. And Ryan gave me the option to bring that character back to life, and I was like, no man, you know what? I'm gonna leave that to the gods. That's up to you. If this character comes back, that's you, not me. So he's like, okay, well, Arlock, that was his name, he dies. So then I make a priest, but not just I make a cleric, but not just a cleric. I multi-class. I'll make a cleric bard. Because this guy really is a cleric. He does actually have divine power, but he's not going to waste that divine power on non-believers. Come on, really? So then he uses his bardic powers, especially his bardic powers of like bluffing and making things seem real and like creating minor magical effects. But the coolest thing that character ever did was we were all mercenaries, and we were hired out to a gambling boat, a riverboat, to as extra security. The riverboat gets attacked by a bunch of pirates, and during the repelling of said pirates, I used a bard spell called Glibness, and Glibness has a lot of different effects. What it said in 3.5 edition, if I'm remembering correctly, is that like everyone that can hear your voice, like, focuses in on your voice. They're not paying attention to other like background sounds, and they believe that gives your bluff skill plus 30. So I wasn't actually using it for the bluff check, but the idea is that it makes people believe what you're saying by making you super charismatic. And as a bard, I didn't have like singing or a musical instrument. My bardic thing was oration. So what I did was I gave last rites to all of these pirates aboard this ship that were attacking us. That was probably the coolest thing he ever did. And then he died. He was back at our base. One of our allies had done something really stupid, and a bomb got sent to our base, in the guise of a package. Well, I was there when the package was opened, and I died. So, in comes into that campaign my third character, who is specifically designed not as like a revenge character, but the whole idea of this character was I had picked up a new book and I wanted to play a class. I wanted to play the samurai class. Except in Iron Kingdoms, there's really not a good... That's not true. But the one good, like, thing that fits samurai well is a really evil race. Like, really evil race. And I didn't want to play them. But we figured out a way to make it work. And the samurai comes in. He's not taking money for any of the jobs that this crew, known as the Wrecking Crew, is doing. He's there solely for information. As long as he's able to get this team together and on track, and they complete their ultimate task, he gets the information he needs and leaves. That's the whole... That's it. That's all he's trying to do. Except the characters keep dilly-dallying and putzing around, and so he tries to get things in order, and like it turns a couple of them in for being like instigators and causing problems and being the ones that caused the bomb to be sent to our facility. And we then, like, that gets resolved mostly. Later on, we're going through this temple, this, I wouldn't say evil temple, but not a good guy temple. And we have a character in our group that is just pulling like levers and pushing switches and doing all sorts of dumb stuff. And we have no idea what's going on in this place because of what he's doing. We're just hearing lots of noises, and it can't be good. So we tell him to stop. And then we go into another room, very similar, and he does it again. Like, okay, if you don't stop, we will put you down. Well, as it turns out, this other player's character was better than 4 of our characters. He killed my character in the first round of combat by doing 4 times my character's damage in a single strike, or my character's hit points in a single strike. Same level characters. I was dead. But after that event, the game dissolved because all of the original characters were dead. And we just had a PvP fight, which, by the way, in most D&D games, is not something that happens. And when it does, things are bad. Things are not good. So that game dissolved. And then... who ran the next game? Oh. Then we picked up a different game called Dark Heresy, which is the Warhammer 40k role-playing game. And that game is supposed to be all about like investigations and checking things out and being a lot more like Call of Cthulhu-esque, except the person running it was a War Games player, a minis game player, and he hadn't really been able to get his War Games on in quite a while because his car was broken down. So we would go and pick him up to run our game and take him home, but he couldn't on his own time go down to the gaming shop and play Warhammer 40k. So he essentially turned our RPG game into a not a minis game, but definitely into a war game. He put us into war zones. Like, we weren't really doing much investigating of anything. He just gave us all sorts of powerful weapons and armor and other BS that we really weren't supposed to have. And that game ended because we were immature and sabotaged it. Eventually it did just evolve into just straight up being minis wargaming with graph paper and little graph cutouts representing the models. So what we did, and I'm not proud of this now. It was funny. It still is funny, but I'm not proud of it. Is we got two bottles of nitrate and got drunk AF. And then just proceeded to dick around with walkie-talkies and whatnot at the game table. And then after that, that game was over. It was extremely immature of us. We should have spoken to the DM about the fact that we weren't happy with the campaign, where it was going, what we were doing, the fact that we weren't doing anything, as a matter of fact. We were all sitting on the side of the game while he played a minis combat game on graph paper. We were not good players for that game. That was very, very immature of us, and if I could go back and change that, I would. But can't, so just have to live with that shame forever. Meanwhile, if you guys remember housemate Roland, he was writing his own entire game. God, I hate it when that happens. Compendium. 5th edition. Here we are. So hopefully that'll fix that problem. I don't know why that happens eventually with rich text documents. There we are. Look at that. We can, once again, not accidentally delete over our stuff by pushing spacebar. But Roland was developing his own RPG system, at the time called Of Gods and Men, but was later renamed to Break Action. It's kind of a fast-paced, like 80s action movie is the kind of like stuff that you can expect from it. Where you play someone who's not entirely human. Known as gods. In certain points in history, they were known as wizards or whatever. Sorry about that. And the campaign setting for that is the ever-present modern day. So, it's whatever the current time period is, roughly. and it is a blast. It's very super simple, very fast-paced, and that changed everything for me in terms of role-playing. So in Ryan's game of Iron Kingdoms, I lost 3 characters. In my friend's game of Dark Heresy, I technically lost 1, but then it came back, even though it should have died. But that's neither here nor there. I had 2 characters in that game. And then in Break Action, in our first campaign setting, or in our first campaign of Break Action, we've had a total of 4. I lost 4 characters. Usually pretty horribly, too. Let's see here. I had Jimbo, who was a white kid in LA who wanted to be a hood so bad that he let them just like walk all over him so that he could be in the crypts. And then after he died, he was going through a interdimensional portal from one location of the Earth to another, and he accidentally touched the edge of the portal with his leg, or with his foot, and it ripped his leg off, and he bled to death, and surrounded by a bunch of his friends in a tiny little hideaway access room for a subway system. That was a safe house that he died in. My next character, his name was Sarge. He was an Israeli military instructor. Who was kind of on the older side, a little beat up, taken out of action, specifically to train people because he couldn't perform well in the field. His knees were banged up, like bad. And he died. He was using, I don't know if you've ever seen the first Mission Impossible movie, but they had the electromagnets with the harness. He was using one of those to ride the top of a speeding subway train, trying to shoot incendiary rounds of from an AK to try and blow up fuel tankers before our train hit them. Well, our train hit them. And he did not get killed by the explosion. Oh, no. He got killed when our train suddenly was a lot slower than him, and the rest of his body was ripped into pieces from the harness. After Sarge, I had Jonas, who was a big burly guy, he was strong enough through his godly gifts that he could lift pretty much anything that you could imagine. Like, let's see here, who's someone who's not like Superman strong, but still like very, very strong in either Marvel or DC. He was like barely Angry Hulk strong. But we got into a gunfight, and so I ripped the back door off of a armored car that had this tiny little viewport window. And I deflected, and I stopped probably 100 rounds before a couple of armor-piercing rounds from P90s just happened to stitch through that window and tore my neck apart. I mean, those guys died. My fellow combatants immediately murdered those guys. But that character died. And then I played... It's here after Jonas. I played Richard. Richard was an Olympic air rifleman. Who had the gift to make... I don't know how many of you watch anime either, but yeah, I'm sure you've seen, like, whenever someone swings a sword in anime, there's usually, like, a gust of wind that can still, like, cut things from much farther away. He could make those with his mind. Those like, wind blades. That was his gift. Oh, I should mention what the other two characters in Break Action that I've talked about. So Jimbo's gift was, he just had the gift of, like, if he saw something, read something, heard something, perfect recall. Also, he had there's a gift in the game called Akumen that is essentially like Sherlock Holmes The Gift. Like, you essentially get to, like, ask the GM or dictate to the GM how you want to do this thing, as long as it falls within your skill sets. He didn't get to use those gifts very often, or very frequently. And Sarge didn't have gifts. He was a normal human. But Richard, how did Richard die? We were fighting a giant maggot in Russia that could create giant blue Dragon Ball Z style energy blasts. And I happened to attract its attention by shooting a javelin missile into it. And then, well, even though I hurt it really bad, I got giant super anime lasered in the face. Well, I guess technically the back, but... After that, I played the Mad Monk Grigory Rasputin, who didn't die. Because that was his power. That was his gift. He couldn't die. I spent all the experience that I had earned not to give him any, like, useful gifts that actually, like, help him do stuff, but he had the ability to self-regenerate, and he had the ability of exceptionally long life. So he couldn't die. But he also couldn't really do anything. Like, he was essentially like a font of knowledge, but that was about it. In fact, the first time I had him fire a gun, he just kind of dropped it and just, like, kicked it to the side. In our second campaign... Wait, is that one that I can't talk about? Yes, it is. Sorry, second campaign I can't talk about. Third campaign, and there's reasons. It revolves around a faction of the game that is mysterious and behind the scenes. In the next campaign for Break Action that we played in, my first character was... I believe it was Sky. And Sky was... He was a businessman, except he had grown up with... he had grown up in a commune, except he hated that life, so he left it, and hated all that hippie BS and whatnot. So he went into business. He went to business school, and he graduated, ran a Fortune 500 company until he got cancer. And then he pulled a Doctor Strange. He went all over the world trying to get his cancer cured, spent all his money, only to find out He went, including like weirdo hippie style medicine, or I shouldn't say weirdo. People use them for like relaxation and stuff like that, and some pain relief. But he went to like Reiki and acupuncture and herbalism and things like that because everything else had failed him up to that point. And none of that worked, but he learned how to do like Reiki. So he was like it helped relieve the pain. So he was doing it on himself, and that's when his own gift activated. The gift of being able to heal, not just himself, but people he touched. And he didn't understand it. He was really confused. But then he went into business and started making money actually healing people with what most doctors consider like bullshit Eastern voodoo. And voodoo's not the right word, but mysticism. Like acupuncture and Reiki and crystal healing. He could actually heal people with that stuff. So he marketed it and went into business and made tons of money. He died. No, he wasn't the first. He was like the third. My first one was a kid, a super like kind of nerdy kid, except he was big enough and tough enough in school that he protected all the other nerdy kids from bullies. He would never start the fights, but god damn it, would he finish them. And he died. How did he die? He died. Did he die on the train? I think he died on the train. He was backed into a corner with a guy, and they were both just stabbing the shit out of each other, and then they bled to death in the corner. It was really bad and really kind of sad. After that, I can't remember his name, but he was South African, and he was a magician, like a stage magician, with the minor power of telekinesis. And he died in a nuclear explosion. The group that we were in had found out that one of our enemies had set us up the bomb, and and so they went all over this city trying to find. All of our characters split up trying to find where the bomb was. He found it. He killed everyone guarding the bomb, and he did his best to try and disarm it, but he didn't know how. And as it was counting down and he started getting frustrated, he just smashed the LED display so he couldn't watch the timer anymore, and then just sat there and cried as the bomb went off. Then was Sky. Sky had a rocket-propelled chainsaw cut him in half. God, who was after Sky? There was someone after Sky. Oh, then came my character Everyman. His power was twofold. His features had transformed in kind of like an amorphous description of human male, but like literally nothing distinct, and he had the power to make people kind of forget who he was. Like things didn't click in the mind. So he used this to like sneak into places and convince people that he was like rich people to get away with things. And he sacrificed himself to a... I don't really know what to call it other than maybe a demon. To get revenge on somebody far, far worse. His job, he was a cryptid hunter. Cryptids, if you don't know, are mythical beasts which existed in this world, and he part of his job, part of what he took upon himself before joining this organization, the Edenites, was that he would track down cryptids and destroy them before... Well, not necessarily destroy them, but if they were, like, causing problems in general society, he would go and take care of them before the rest of the regular world, like, figured it out and figured out that there was a lot more going on than they understood. Because then, people like him, once people are looking for things that are unusual, they're gonna find them. And he didn't want that. Because he was unusual. Let's see here. And then we played a version of Break Action that took place way in the past, just after World War II. My first character in that was Coach. He was a football coach and an ex-boxer, and an ex-track runner. He had the power of speed. He was just really fast. Not, like, so abnormally fast that it, like, defied logic. He was just a little bit faster. Also, he was turning into a bat. I mean, not like a bat, but a man bat. He died in a gunfight. He got filled full of holes. After Coach, I played another just regular human. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I've got all the character sheets of every character I've ever played in a binder on the shelf. So, like, if I really wanted to, I could just go and pull that out and have everything at my fingertips. But I don't. But he was just a pilot. He was a normal guy. He was a pilot. An okay pilot. But he didn't die. He left before he could die. Because there was an opportunity to get out, and both of his parents were gods, even though he wasn't. No, that's not true. He was a god, but his godly power was not the type of thing that most people can notice. It was called endurance, and it made it so that while it was activated, he didn't have to eat, sleep, drink anything. But whenever you would come down off of it, you had to immediately do all those things as quickly as possible before you put your body under too much stress. But he had so many points in this gift that if he did sleep, this was before this got fixed, but if he did sleep, he would regain enough points to reactivate this before it went away. So he could do it forever. And he only had to sleep one night, and he would be up for like a month off of that one night. Both of his parents were gods, and some stuff was going to go down, so he had to leave, and he went to go save his parents. And that's when I introduced... I can't remember his name, but he was a private eye. And he had the ability that I mentioned earlier, Akumen. The ability to just kind of like dictate how I want things to go. Kind of. Like Sherlock Holmes, Eureka, this is how it's going to work sort of thing. Except that was through the roof. And I used it in a very interesting way. I used it to Eureka the math for bullets. So I could do trick shots like nobody's business. Ricochet shots off of walls that you're not really supposed to be able... Like, you wouldn't normally be able to get a ricochet off of, but because he could do the math, he could do it. He could all but curve bullets. That's how good at this he was. He died as an old man, far away from home. After getting a sniper rifle bullet through about 2/3 of his body. I've had a lot of characters die in break action. In fact, all but like 3 of my characters have died in break action. That's kind of how that game goes. Since then, I've been in a lot of smaller campaigns, and that was around the time when I started DMing myself. My first thing that I ever DM'd was just a short, like, 3 sessions of 4th edition D&D. Because that's all I could do for a city adventure was about 3 sessions, and I just wanted to try something small and see if I enjoyed DMing or not. And I did. In fact, I loved it. I don't like it as much as playing, but I do thoroughly enjoy being a dungeon master. One of the things that I've come to appreciate about GMing and playing and all this stuff is people tend to prefer one or the other, and some people, even if it's not the one that they prefer, are just like really good at one or the other. Hey Kasan, I am doing very well, sir. Coming in right at the end. How are you doing? Like I prefer playing because I like digging deep into a role and like really becoming another person for it. While GMing, you take over a lot more roles and be a lot more people around the table. It's usually not as in depth. You certainly may. The basis is that it is a D&D based game. It is... So, Al-Qadim... Hold on, I got props, kind of. So, this is Al-Qadim. It is an Arabian-themed Dungeons & Dragons setting that had a massive printing in the 2nd edition of D&D. And actually, not even massive, but it had a larger than normal printing in 2nd edition D&D. And I love the setting so much that I've decided that it deserves more than that. This being one of my favorite images of the whole game. So, what we are currently doing is we're taking this old campaign setting that I love so very much, and we are putting it into the newest versions of Dungeons & Dragons. Meanwhile, I just tell a whole bunch of role-playing stories about either awesome times or bad times or whatever. Right now, we're in the process of designing what is essentially like the world guide. So it's going to have all the information from everything from like what are the kinds of attire, what it's like to live in a city in Al-Qadim, what it's like to live out on the periphery in the deserts, which is going to be largely this initial section is going to be largely unedited, raw. Like, this is going to be primarily for those people that want to get like deep into what it's like to actually live in ancient Arabia / Persia, and or at least themed that way. Before we get into the actual rules, because the actual rules, like, this is kind of tedious watching me do this. Like, I'm not even editing right now. I'm just copying and pasting from the old book, the old books rather. This is also a great image. That way, because a lot of this stuff, like, I could sit here and rewrite all of this stuff, given enough time, but why? Why would I do that to myself? They've already given me a significant head start with all the research and information that they've published. So right now, I'm in the process of taking just the basic lore, sort of world building stuff, the stuff that doesn't matter what edition it's in, what time frame, anything like that, and putting that all into one cohesive section. Later on, I will edit all this down to be a bit more comprehensible, and this section that we're doing primarily right now, like I said, is for Dungeon Masters. When we get to doing a player's section, we're going to take some of this information and put it in the player's section, but most of that is just going to be like very small versions of all this same information that's just kind of like, this is what you need to know to play the game. It's not even need to know, like, this is the base level versions of slavery in Al-Qadim, the divorce, marriage, women's roles, architecture, just like the slim pickings of what you need to know. Whew, I've still got a lot of stuff to even copy over. So the Desert Tribes is the next spot, and I'm going to go ahead and copy all that over. And since you guys have pretty much seen all that I'm doing for the next, I don't know how long, but a while, I'm going to just copy as much of this stuff over and do a significant portion of this kind of busy work off screen. Because let's face it, watching me backspace and backspace and space is not the most interesting. So I'm going to do what I can to make that not so harsh on the stream. When we do the editing stuff, well, then we're going to need to do, like, actually go through and start reading a bunch of this stuff and cutting stuff out. So that ought to be enough to drop in for now. But it is 9 o'clock. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and call it for tonight. I want a special thanks to everyone for hanging out with me. And most especially Kassan and Day Zero for participating in chat. Remember, tomorrow from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. we're going to be back on Elder Scrolls Arena, trying to figure out what we're supposed to do, because that wasn't made very clear. Anyway, hope you guys will join me. Oh, also, check out that Humble sale going on right now. It's pretty substantial, so if you're looking at picking something up, please go check out that sale. It's kind of ridiculous. I bought 3 games this morning for $30. 3 big games for $30. So go check it out. There's going to be something you want. Beyond that, I hope you guys have a wonderful night, and will join me tomorrow where we will pick up with Elder Scrolls. Have a good night.